Picture this: one day, a bustling underwater metropolis shimmering with color and movement; the next, a silent, skeletal graveyard stretching into the blue. It's a transformation as dramatic as it is mysterious, and it's happening right now, beneath the ocean's surface, all across our planet. These collapsed reefs, often seen as symbols of loss and ecological tragedy, hold within their crumbling structures some of the ocean's most profound secrets about life, death, time, and resilience. What if I told you that these sites of apparent destruction are not just tombs, but living libraries? Libraries that preserve millions of years of biological history, while simultaneously giving birth to entirely new forms of life. Today, we're embarking on a journey into the depths to explore the hidden timeline of submerged biodiversity within these collapsed reef systems. We'll uncover how catastrophe paradoxically fosters creation, how the very processes that bring reefs down also set the stage for strange and wonderful ecological rebirth. From ancient fossil records locked in layers of sediment to unexpected partnerships between species that thrive in the rubble, this story is as much about hope and adaptation as it is about loss. And it's a story written not in ink, but in coral, sand, bone, and time, a narrative that spans 500 million years and speaks directly to the challenges our oceans face today. You'll discover how shifting sands entomb evidence of past extinctions, offering scientists and all of us critical clues to navigating the future of marine conservation. You'll encounter creatures so specialized and elusive they're found nowhere else on Earth, and hear how human history intertwines with these submerged worlds in ways that continue to surprise researchers. This isn't just a tale for marine biologists or historians. It's a deeply human story about curiosity, discovery, and our relationship with the natural world. So join me as we dive below the waves to explore what lies beneath and prepare to see the ocean and its cycles of life and collapse in a whole new light. To truly appreciate the story of reef collapse, we must first travel back in time, way back, over 500 million years ago, to an era when the continents were unrecognizable and life in the oceans was just beginning to experiment with complex forms. This is when the first coral-like organisms, known as archaeociathids, began building rudimentary reef structures in warm, shallow seas. These ancient architects, though vastly different from today's corals, set a precedent. They proved that collective biological effort could literally reshape the planet, creating massive underwater fortresses that would dominate marine environments for eons to come. Jump forward a couple 100 million years, and we encounter the great reef builders of the Silurian and Devonian periods. This was the true golden age of ancient reefs, a time when stromatoporoids and tabulate corals collaborated to construct colossal barrier reefs that dwarfed even the modern Great Barrier Reef. These structures were so immense they left behind entire mountain ranges like the famous Dolomites in Italy, their fossilized skeletons standing as eternal monuments to their former glory. These reefs were the bustling metropolises of their day, providing habitat for an explosion of new life, including early fish, giant sea scorpions, and countless bizarre invertebrates. The sheer scale of their biodiversity was a testament to the reef's role as an engine of evolutionary innovation. But this golden age wasn't destined to last forever. The fossil record tells a story not of constant stability, but of dramatic booms and busts. Reefs have faced near total annihilation multiple times, often coinciding with the planet's 5 major mass extinction events. The most devastating was the Permian-Triassic extinction, aptly nicknamed the Great Dying, which occurred around 250 million years ago. Catastrophic volcanic activity, soaring global temperatures, and ocean acidification conspired to wipe out nearly 95% of all marine species. The mighty reefs of the Permian vanished, and the oceans would remain eerily silent, devoid of any significant reef development for millions of years. This pattern of collapse and recovery is the central theme written in stone. After each catastrophe, life eventually found a way back. Following the Great Dying, it took a staggering 10 to 15 million years for complex reef ecosystems to re-establish themselves. When they did, a new cast of characters took the stage. The Mesozoic era became the age of the rudest bizarre, clam-like bivalves that could grow several meters tall and formed massive, dense banks. For 100 million years, these unconventional creatures were the dominant reef builders, until their own reign was ended by the asteroid impact that also claimed the dinosaurs. Each of these collapses left behind a detailed, layered record. Paleontologists act as underwater detectives, extracting core samples from these ancient seabeds. By studying the composition of these sediment layers, the mix of fossilized species, the chemical isotopes, the evidence of volcanic ash or meteorite dust, they can read the timeline of disaster like a book. They can see which species died out first, which hardy survivors clung on the longest, and most importantly, how long it took for new life to fill the vacant space. This deep time perspective is not just academic, it provides a crucial baseline. It shows us that reefs have an incredible capacity for resilience, but that their recovery operates on a geological timescale far exceeding a human lifespan. This history teaches us a vital, humbling lesson. The reefs we know and love today, built primarily by stony corals of the order Scleractinia, are just the latest chapter in a very long and cyclical story. They have already survived several ice ages and global warming events. Their persistence suggests a profound resilience, an ability to adapt and reinvent themselves. Yet, their repeated collapses also highlight a fundamental vulnerability to rapid, extreme change. The pace of the environmental shifts we are causing today is unprecedented in Earth's history. Understanding how ancient reefs weathered their own crises is perhaps our single most valuable tool for predicting what might come next and for guiding our efforts to protect these irreplaceable ecosystems. Their past is the key to our future. While ancient reefs faced threats spanning millions of years, the challenges confronting modern coral ecosystems are unfolding at a breathtaking and alarming pace. The primary engine driving this contemporary collapse is a seemingly small shift with enormous consequences: the steady, relentless warming of our oceans. Think of a coral reef not as a collection of individual rocks, but as a vast, living city. The corals themselves are the architects and the foundational infrastructure. But they don't work alone. Inside their tissues reside millions of microscopic algae called zooxanthellae. This is one of the most successful partnerships in nature. The algae, through photosynthesis, provide up to 90% of the coral's food, a sugary energy boost. In return, the coral polyp offers the algae a safe, sunny place to live. It's a perfect, beautiful symbiosis that has built the greatest structures ever created by living organisms. Ocean warming shatters this partnership. When water temperatures rise even just 1 or 2 degrees Celsius above the usual summer maximum for a prolonged period, the relationship becomes toxic. The stressed algae begin producing harmful chemicals, and the coral, in a desperate act of self-preservation, expels its very source of life. This is what we call bleaching. The term is deceptively gentle. It's not a mild fading of color, it is a violent physiological divorce. The coral animal is still alive, but it is now starving, ghostly white, and incredibly vulnerable. Without its algal partners, it has lost its primary food factory. A bleached coral is a coral in intensive care. It can survive for a few weeks in this state, hoping for the water to cool so it can welcome the algae back. But if the heat stress persists, the coral will literally starve to death, its tissue dissolving away to leave behind nothing but a stark white skeleton. This individual tragedy rapidly escalates into a full-blown ecosystem collapse. The intricate architecture of the reef, built over centuries, provided nooks and crannies for an incredible diversity of life. With a coral dead or dying, the entire food web unravels. The brightly colored fish that depend on the coral for food and shelter disappear. The shrimp, the crabs, the lobsters, they all vanish. The reef, once a bustling metropolis of color and activity, falls silent. It becomes a marine ghost town, but the impact of warming doesn't stop at bleaching. Warmer water holds less dissolved carbon dioxide, which directly contributes to ocean acidification. This chemical change makes it harder and eventually impossible for surviving corals and other shell-building creatures to pull the necessary minerals from the water to construct their skeletons. The very foundation of the reef begins to dissolve, weakening the entire structure. Furthermore, the increased energy in warmer oceans supercharges tropical storms. More frequent and more powerful hurricanes deliver catastrophic physical blows to these already weakened ecosystems. Giant waves smash the fragile coral formations into rubble, a process that would have taken a healthy reef decades to recover from, but which a stressed reef may never overcome. We have witnessed this domino effect play out on a global scale. Events like the mass bleaching of 2016, which affected 93% of the Great Barrier Reef, are not isolated incidents. They are stark markers on a timeline of accelerating decline. Scientists can now trace how the loss of a single keystone species, like the algae grazing parrotfish, creates a cascade of failure, allowing seaweed to smother any remaining coral and preventing new larvae from settling. The silent assassin of ocean warming doesn't just kill the corals, it systematically dismantles an entire world, leaving behind a barren, crumbling landscape where very little can thrive. While the silent, pervasive threat of warming seas sets the stage for collapse, our own direct actions often deliver the final, crushing blow. Human impact acts as a hammer, shattering reef ecosystems that are already weakened by the anvil of climate change. Consider the brutal efficiency of dynamite fishing, a practice still tragically common in some regions. The concussive blast of a homemade bomb doesn't just kill the target fish, it instantly pulverizes centuries of intricate coral growth into barren gravel fields. This isn't just hunting, it's ecological vandalism on a staggering scale, leaving behind a wasteland where recovery is nearly impossible. On land, our cities and farms generate a constant, toxic runoff that flows directly into coastal waters. Fertilizers from agriculture and sewage from overflowing systems act like an all-you-can-eat buffet for algae. This nutrient pollution triggers massive algal blooms that cloud the water, blocking the life-giving sunlight that corals desperately need for photosynthesis. When these blooms eventually die and decompose, the process sucks all the oxygen out of the water, creating vast, dead zones where nothing can survive except for a few hardy bacteria. It's a silent, suffocating death for entire reef communities, a far cry from the dramatic explosion of a bomb, but equally destructive in the end. The physical footprint of coastal development is another major culprit. The dredging of harbors, the construction of marinas, and the building of seawalls and resorts churn up immense plumes of fine sediment. For a coral, this is like being trapped in a perpetual dust storm. These tiny particles settle on their surfaces, smothering them, preventing them from feeding, and effectively burying them alive. Even well-intentioned tourism can take its toll. A single careless fin kick from a diver can break a coral branch that took decades to grow, while the constant application of chemical-laden sunscreens has been shown to cause coral bleaching and DNA damage in larval stages. Perhaps one of the most insidious human impacts is overfishing, which dismantles the reef's delicate balance from the inside out. When we remove key herbivores like parrotfish and surgeonfish, we are essentially firing the gardeners of the reef. Without these constant grazers, algae grows unchecked, rapidly outcompeting young corals for space and light. A reef that loses its fishy lawnmowers can transform from a coral-dominated ecosystem to a slimy, algal-dominated one in just a few years. This shifts the entire system into an alternative stable state from which it is incredibly difficult to return. Historical fishing records paint a stark picture, showing a direct correlation between the decline of key species and the rapid overgrowth of reefs by macroalgae. The cumulative effect of these pressures is a dramatic acceleration of the natural timeline of collapse. Where a reef might have taken centuries to decline from natural climate shifts, human activity can catalyze the same process in mere decades. Studies consistently show that reefs located near dense human populations decline at a rate up to 50% faster than their more remote counterparts. We are not just witnesses to this collapse, we are active participants, our daily choices and economic systems driving a process that leaves behind skeletal graveyards where vibrant cities once thrived. Yet, as we will see, even in these graveyards, life finds a way to persist in the most surprising and paradoxical forms. The moment a reef structure gives way, it doesn't just become an empty graveyard, it transforms into a stage for one of nature's most fascinating and chaotic dramas. Picture a bustling city suddenly abandoned after a catastrophe. The initial silence is quickly broken not by the return of the original residents, but by scavengers, opportunists, and a whole host of creatures that thrive on chaos. This is precisely what happens on the seafloor. The complex architecture of the reef, now reduced to jagged rubble and skeletal remains, becomes a gold mine of newly available resources. With the dominant corals gone, the rules of the ecosystem are suddenly rewritten, and a frantic rush begins to claim this newly opened territory. First to arrive are the cleanup crews. Bristleworms, with their voracious appetites, swarm over the decaying coral tissue, breaking down organic matter at an astonishing rate. Crabs, both hermit and free-living, scavenge through the debris, their sharp pincers making quick work of any leftover biomass. These organisms are the ultimate generalists, equipped to thrive in low-oxygen, nutrient-poor conditions that would kill more sensitive species. Their population numbers can explode, creating a temporary, almost paradoxical, boom in life amidst the ruins. For a short time, the biodiversity at the site might even appear to increase, but it's a very different kind of diversity, one dominated by detritivores and scavengers rather than the intricate web of specialized relationships that define the healthy reef. This shift in species composition is a classic example of what ecologists call a succession reset. It's as if the evolutionary clock of the ecosystem has been wound all the way back to zero. The complex, stable community that took centuries to build is gone, and the process of building a new one from scratch begins anew. This presents a unique opportunity for scientists. It's like having a front-row seat to the very first days of a new world, allowing them to observe which species arrive first, how they interact, and which ones ultimately gain a foothold to shape the future environment. This chaotic interim period is not just random noise. It follows a predictable ecological script, one that has played out after every major disturbance on Earth, from forest fires to volcanic eruptions. Perhaps most intriguingly, this rubble field can become an unexpected sanctuary for some of the ocean's most elusive creatures. The nooks and crannies of the collapsed structure provide perfect hiding places for species that shun the open water or the exposure of a living, healthy reef. The ghost pipefish, a master of camouflage that resembles a piece of floating seaweed, often finds ideal breeding grounds in these complex rubble beds. Similarly, cryptic octopus species like the mimic octopus appreciate the abundance of hiding spots and the buffet of small crustaceans that move in. For these animals, a collapsed reef isn't a tragedy. It's a prime piece of real estate, offering protection and opportunity that a densely populated healthy reef cannot. This phase of chaotic transition is therefore not an endpoint, but a critical, dynamic, and poorly understood chapter in the reef's ongoing story, a testament to life's relentless ability to adapt and find a way, even in the face of utter devastation. And just as this chaotic transition unfolds, a quieter, more meticulous process begins, one that turns the site of destruction into a library for the future. The very rubble that signals the reef's end becomes the raw material for its most enduring record. As waves and currents slowly grind the skeletal remains of corals into finer and finer particles, they mix with sand, silt, and the constant rain of organic debris from the water column above. This mixture settles layer by painstaking layer, gradually building up a sedimentary archive that meticulously entombs the evidence of the reef's final days. Think of it not as a simple pile of sand, but as a detailed chronological ledger of death and survival, written in bone, shell, and genetic material. These accumulating layers act like the pages of an underwater history book, with each distinct stratum capturing a precise snapshot of the ecosystem at a specific moment in time. The very bottom layers might contain large, recognizable coral fragments from the initial collapse. As you move upward, the sediment becomes finer, preserving smaller clues, the microscopic shells of plankton that flourished in the changed water conditions, the tiny ear bones of fish that schooled in the area, and even the chemical signatures of the water itself, which can tell us about past temperature and acidity. This isn't just a record of the big, obvious events. It's a fossilized inventory of an entire world in transition. To read this history, scientists employ a remarkable technique, extracting long, cylindrical core samples from the seafloor. Using specialized drills operated from research vessels, they push hollow tubes deep into the sediment, pulling up a continuous column that might represent thousands of years of accumulation. Back in the lab, this core becomes a time machine. Researchers use radiocarbon dating on organic material within the layers to pin down exact dates. They then employ sophisticated DNA analysis, a technique called environmental DNA or eDNA meta-barcoding, to identify every species that left a genetic trace in the sediment, even if their physical remains are long gone. This allows them to reconstruct timelines of biodiversity with astonishing detail, showing not just which species vanished, but in what order and which resilient holdouts managed to persist. The stories these muddy archives tell are both sobering and illuminating. For instance, sediment cores taken from collapsed reefs in the Caribbean clearly show a dramatic shift that coincides with the period of European colonization. Layers dated to before the 1500s are rich with the hard, beak-like mouthparts of parrotfish, crucial algae grazers. Suddenly, in layers from the 16th and 17th centuries, these remains vanish almost completely, correlating perfectly with historical records of intensive overfishing. Immediately following this disappearance, the sediment shows a massive influx of algal spores, marking the moment the reef's balance tipped and algae began its takeover, a state from which many Caribbean reefs have never recovered. Similarly, in cores drilled from the Pacific, scientists can pinpoint exact moments of catastrophe. A layer of volcanic ash, chemically matched to a known eruption on a distant island, is immediately followed by a layer devoid of most coral debris, painting a clear picture of a reef smothered and killed. In more recent layers, a new and alarming signature has emerged: microplastics. These tiny synthetic particles are now permanently embedded in the sedimentary record, creating a stark, undeniable marker of the Anthropocene epoch, the age of human influence. Yet, these archives don't only chronicle death, they also reveal stories of quiet resilience. In some cores, the genetic signature of a particular coral species might disappear after a collapse event, only to reappear in younger layers centuries later, suggesting a small, remote population survived and eventually recolonized the area. This buried evidence provides an invaluable long-term dataset, allowing us to move beyond short-term observations and make much more accurate predictions about how modern reefs might respond to the intense stresses of the coming century. Yet, within this sedimentary library, a parallel story unfolds, one not of quiet preservation, but of active, hidden life. While the layers of sand and silt are slowly building their historical record, the rubble field above is far from deserted. It becomes the domain of nature's most elusive specialists, a realm so cryptic and adapted that it often goes completely unnoticed. This is the world of the shadow ecosystem, a community of organisms that don't just survive in the collapse, they positively thrive in it, turning apparent ruin into a kingdom of opportunity. These creatures are the masters of stealth and specialization. To walk through a collapsed reef is to stroll through a city where every resident is a master of disguise, a night prowler, or an expert in living in the tiniest of spaces. Consider the humble yet astonishing sponge. While they might look like simple, colorful blobs, many species are filtration powerhouses, pumping vast quantities of water through their bodies to extract bacteria and organic particles. In the nutrient-rich waters of a decay zone, they find a feast, often growing in spectacular, rarely seen forms deep within the crevices of rubble. Then there are the bioluminescent bacteria, which coat surfaces in a faint, ethereal glow, a silent, chemical light show in the abyss that serves as a form of communication or a lure for prey in the perpetual twilight. Perhaps the most vital engineers of this hidden world are the boring organisms. This isn't a comment on their personality, but a description of their profession. They literally bore into the hard, calcium carbonate skeleton of the dead reef. Tiny worms like the aptly named shipworms and a host of specialized bivalves use acid secretions and physical rasping to tunnel into the rock-hard coral. This activity is not destructive, it's profoundly constructive. By slowly breaking down the massive, solid structure into a more complex, porous network of tunnels and holes, they create countless new micro-habitats for other creatures. They are the ultimate recyclers, turning the reef's own bones into the foundation for its future life, processing the past to make way for the future. This complex labyrinth becomes the preferred home for species that are almost mythological in their rarity. The rubble-dwelling goby, for instance, is a small fish that has evolved to live its entire life within the interstices of coral rubble. It has no need for open water. It darts from one tiny pore space to another, hunting microcrustaceans in a world measured in millimeters. Even more bizarre are the blind cave shrimp that inhabit flooded crevices, their eyes having degenerated completely in the perpetual darkness, replaced by hypersensitive antennae that read the subtle currents of their enclosed world. For these species, a healthy, intact reef is actually a terrible habitat, too open, too competitive, too bright. They are the endemic citizens of collapse, found nowhere else on Earth. making these degraded sites unexpected arcs of biodiversity and sanctuaries for evolutionary uniqueness. The discovery of these communities has forced a dramatic rethink in marine science. Researchers piloting remotely operated vehicles through rubble fields have filmed species that are entirely new to science: strange, ghostly octopuses, never-before-seen species of sea stars, and bizarre fish that defy classification. Each discovery chips away at the simplistic idea that a collapsed reef is a dead zone. Instead, it reveals a dynamic and layered process. The ecosystem hasn't vanished, it has transitioned. It has traded the bright, photosynthetic, fish-dominated world of the surface for a darker, detritus-driven, invertebrate-dominated world below. And this shadow ecosystem is not just a biological curiosity. It performs essential ecological heavy lifting. The constant activity of its residents stabilizes the loose sediment, preventing it from smothering adjacent healthy reefs. They continue to cycle nutrients, filtering the water and processing waste, maintaining a baseline of function that can serve as a lifeline for broader marine recovery when conditions improve. This hidden resilience is nature's ultimate insurance policy, a reminder that even in the face of catastrophe, life holds on in the most ingenious and unexpected ways, patiently waiting for its moment to rise again. But this transformation doesn't happen overnight. The process of reef regeneration is a slow, painstaking dance with time itself, a biological marathon where the baton is passed from one generation of species to the next. This ecological progression, known as succession, is nature's way of healing its own wounds. It all begins with the pioneers, the first brave colonists willing to stake a claim in the barren landscape. Tough, encrusting coralline algae are often the true heroes of this initial phase. They spread across the unstable rubble like a living mortar, secreting a hard, pink crust that literally glues the loose fragments together, preventing the constant shifting that would crush any new settlers. Alongside them, fast-growing soft corals and sea whips begin to appear, their flexible bodies able to withstand the unpredictable currents that sweep across the open rubble field. These early arrivals don't look much like a reef, but they perform a vital service. They stabilize the foundation and begin to create the complex three-dimensional structure that other life so desperately needs. This sets the stage for the next wave of immigrants. With a more stable substrate in place, the larvae of hard, stony corals finally have a fighting chance. They drift in from distant healthy reefs or emerge from tiny, protected refuges within the collapse zone itself, settling onto the hardened surfaces created by the coralline algae. Their growth is achingly slow. A coral the size of a dinner plate might represent decades of patient construction. The timeline of this recovery is not a smooth, predictable curve. It's a story of fits and starts, of breathtaking progress and heartbreaking setbacks. A major storm can physically smash a decade's worth of growth back into rubble in a single afternoon. A sudden disease outbreak can wipe out a promising new colony of corals, or, as is so often the case, renewed human interference, a spike in pollution, a dredging project, or a ship running aground, can reset the entire process back to zero, erasing years of delicate progress in an instant. Yet, in areas that are fortunate enough to enjoy long-term protection from these stressors, the results can be nothing short of miraculous. Take, for example, the recovery witnessed in parts of the Pacific Ocean following the catastrophic global bleaching event of 1998. In some locations, what was a stark white graveyard of coral skeletons began to show signs of vibrant life within just 2 decades. But this new reef was different. The cast of characters had changed. The rapid regeneration was often led by a different suite of coral species, ones that are more opportunistic, faster growing, and crucially, more resistant to the heat stress that caused the collapse in the first place. This shift in species composition is a powerful example of evolution in action, a direct response to the pressures of a warming world. The reef that returns is not a perfect replica of the past. It is a new ecosystem adapted for a new era. We can read this story of adaptation and struggle year by year, etched into the very skeletons of the corals themselves. Much like a tree trunk records years of good growth and drought in its rings, a coral skeleton lays down distinct bands of dense and light calcium carbonate with each passing season. Scientists can extract core samples from large, ancient corals and use sophisticated chemical analysis to read these bands. A thick, dense band might indicate a year of ideal water temperature and abundant sunlight, while a thin, stressed band could correspond to a year of a bleaching event or a hurricane. These natural archives provide an incredibly precise timeline of the environmental conditions the reef has endured throughout its recovery, offering an unparalleled window into the past. Over centuries, this interplay between decay and regrowth can create fascinating hybrid ecosystems. The massive, ancient limestone framework of a reef that collapsed 1,000 years ago might still stand, providing a solid, elevated foundation. Upon this geological relic, a completely modern biological community establishes itself, creating a layered tapestry of deep time and contemporary life. These sites are living palimpsests, places where the ancient text of the past is still visible, but has been overwritten by the vibrant story of the present. They stand as powerful monuments to both the fragility and the incredible resilience of these ecosystems, demonstrating that while nature possesses an astonishing ability to bounce back, its capacity for full recovery remains utterly dependent on one crucial ingredient: a long period of stable, peaceful conditions. While the universal threats of warming and human impact loom over every reef, the story of collapse and recovery is anything but uniform across our planet's oceans. Each region writes its own unique chapter, dictated by a complex interplay of local climate, ocean currents, geological history, and the specific pressures exerted by nearby human populations. This geographic tapestry of resilience and vulnerability reveals that there is no single timeline for these underwater worlds, only a collection of distinct narratives, each with its own rhythm of life, death, and rebirth. Take the Caribbean, for example, a region that has become a sobering case study in rapid, human-driven decline. Since the 1980s, its reefs have experienced a devastating one-two punch. First, a mysterious disease swept through the population of long-spined sea urchins, a critical algae grazer, wiping out nearly 99% of these essential custodians. This ecological catastrophe was followed by intense overfishing that removed the other main lawnmowers of the reef, the parrotfish. Without these herbivores to keep it in check, algae ran rampant, smothering coral colonies and preventing new larvae from settling. The result has been a dramatic, systemic shift from coral-dominated ecosystems to algal-dominated ones. Recovery here is measured in generations, not years, as the very mechanisms for natural clean-up have been severed, leaving many Caribbean reefs trapped in a seemingly permanent state of stagnation. Now, journey across the world to the Indo-Pacific, the heart of global coral diversity. Here, the scale is different, and so is the story. While these reefs are far from immune to bleaching, the Great Barrier Reef has suffered massively in recent years. They possess a few key advantages. Their sheer size and connectivity mean that even if one area is devastated, larvae from distant, healthy reefs can occasionally drift in on currents to reseed the damaged zones. Furthermore, the diversity of species itself is a buffer. With hundreds of coral species present, some are inevitably more resistant to heat or disease than others, allowing the ecosystem as a whole to maintain a foothold and regenerate, albeit in an altered form. The recovery timeline is still slow and fraught, but the starting point of greater biodiversity offers a crucial lifeline that the Caribbean has largely lost. Venture into the Red Sea and you encounter a fascinating paradox. The reefs here, particularly in the Gulf of Aqaba, appear to be genetic superheroes. Because the Red Sea is an extremely hot and salty body of water, the corals that have colonized it are the descendants of pioneers that passed through the even hotter, saltier Bab el-Mandeb Strait. This evolutionary filtering process has selected for corals with an extraordinary innate tolerance to heat stress. Studies have shown that many of these corals can withstand temperatures several degrees above the normal bleaching thresholds of corals elsewhere. This gives them a remarkable ability to bounce back quickly from warming events that would devastate other regions. Yet their Achilles heel is not temperature, but local human activity. Rapid coastal development, pollution from shipping, and unsustainable tourism along the shores of Egypt, Israel, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia present a clear and present danger, threatening to undermine their natural resilience with a barrage of direct physical and chemical insults. Then there are the reefs that operate on an entirely different rhythm, driven not by warming but by the ocean's natural chemistry. Off the coast of Peru, for instance, powerful upwelling currents bring cold, nutrient-rich, but also carbon dioxide-rich waters from the deep ocean to the surface. This natural phenomenon creates periodic pulses of extreme acidification, causing localized reef collapses, but this is part of an ancient cyclical process. The same nutrients that make the water corrosive also fuel immense blooms of phytoplankton, which form the base of a food web that can be incredibly productive. These areas become dynamic hotspots of life and death, where collapse and rebirth are part of a natural, centuries-long cycle, creating a boom and bust biodiversity that is entirely different from the stable, sunny reefs of the tropics. And we must not forget the mysterious reefs of the deep and cold. In the dark, frigid waters of the Arctic and North Atlantic, vast reefs built by slow-growing cold-water corals like Lophelia pertusa thrive without sunlight. Their collapse is a silent, invisible crisis driven almost exclusively by ocean acidification. As the ocean absorbs more carbon dioxide, the deeper, colder waters where these corals live are becoming corrosive more quickly than the warm surface waters. This acidification dissolves their delicate skeletons, causing them to literally melt away. Their collapse leaves behind not a rocky rubble, but a silty, muddy plain, preserving a completely different biological signature, one of deep-sea sponges, specialized worms, and other organisms adapted to a world of darkness and pressure, now facing a threat they have never before encountered in their long history. This incredible mosaic of regional stories makes one thing abundantly clear. We cannot apply a single conservation strategy to the entire world. A solution that works for the heat-resilient corals of the Red Sea would be useless for the acidification-threatened corals of the Arctic depths. Protecting the Caribbean requires urgent action to restore its broken grazing ecosystem, while saving the Indo-Pacific might hinge on protecting its few remaining pristine larval sources. Understanding these stark regional disparities is the first, most critical step toward crafting effective, localized interventions that have a real chance of success. It forces us to move beyond broad, generalized slogans and into the nuanced, place-based science that these complex ecosystems so desperately require. To truly understand the future of our oceans, we must first learn to read the stories written in stone, stories of catastrophe and rebirth that unfolded over hundreds of millions of years. These are not tales of simple endings, but of profound transformations, and they are preserved in the fossilized remains of reefs that thrived and collapsed long before humans walked the earth. The most dramatic of these narratives is etched into rocks from the Permian period, around 250 million years ago, during an event known as the Great Dying. This was the most severe extinction event in our planet's history, driven by colossal volcanic eruptions that released enough carbon dioxide and methane to trigger runaway global warming and devastating ocean acidification. The result was the obliteration of up to 90% of all marine species. The magnificent sponge and coral reefs that dominated the Permian seas vanished almost entirely, leaving behind vast underwater deserts where almost nothing could survive. The silence in the oceans following this collapse was profound, an emptiness that persisted for millions of years, a stark reminder of how thoroughly an ecosystem can be dismantled. Yet life did not surrender. The fossil record shows us that after this near-total annihilation, the oceans did not remain barren forever. The first signs of recovery were not the complex reefs we might imagine, but rather humble, simple communities dominated by opportunistic organisms. Mollusks like clams and snails, which have generalist diets and can tolerate a wide range of conditions, became the new pioneers. They were followed by algae and bacteria that formed vast mats across the seafloor, slowly stabilizing the environment and rebuilding the base of the food web. This interim period, often called a disaster fauna, lasted for an astonishing 5 to 10 million years. It serves as a powerful lesson in patience. Ecological recovery on a planetary scale operates on a timeline that is almost incomprehensible to the human experience. It tells us that after a collapse, the first life to return is not the most glamorous or complex, but the most resilient and adaptable. One of the most crucial patterns paleontologists have identified from these deep time collapses is the survival advantage of generalists over specialists. Species with narrow dietary needs or specific habitat requirements, like many of the intricate corals and trilobites that thrived in the stable Permian reefs, were the first to perish when their world changed too quickly. In contrast, organisms that could eat a variety of foods and survive in different environments had a far better chance of weathering the storm. This pattern is not just a historical curiosity, it is a direct warning for today. In our modern reefs, the most vulnerable species are often the specialists, the fish that eat only one type of coral, or the corals that can only reproduce within a very narrow temperature window. The ancient past suggests that as our current crisis unfolds, we should expect to see a similar shift toward generalist species, which will fundamentally alter the character of marine ecosystems. The story of renewal after collapse is also a story of innovation. The end of one dominant group often clears the evolutionary playing field for another to rise. A spectacular example of this is the collapse of the rudest reefs at the end of the Cretaceous period. Rudists were bizarre, giant clam-like creatures that had formed massive, sprawling reefs throughout the warm Cretaceous seas. When the asteroid impact that also killed the dinosaurs caused a sudden, dramatic shift in the global climate, the rudists were completely wiped out. Their disappearance, however, created an ecological opportunity. In the millions of years that followed, the modern stony corals we know today, which had been minor players during the age of the rudists, began to diversify and expand. They evolved new forms and partnerships, eventually building the complex, intricate reefs that would come to define tropical oceans. Similarly, the mass extinction at the end of the Triassic period, another event driven by volcanic activity and climate change, devastated the coral communities of the time. This collapse directly paved the way for the evolution and eventual dominance of modern fish groups, leading to an explosion of marine biodiversity that shaped the oceans we recognize. These rebounds were not a return to what was before, but a reinvention, the emergence of a new normal. Scientists unlock these timelines by analyzing core samples drilled from ancient seabeds that have long since been uplifted and turned to stone. These sedimentary archives act like a geological DNA test for the planet. By examining the layers corresponding to a collapse event, researchers can pinpoint the exact order in which species disappear from the record. They can analyze the chemical isotopes locked in the rock to determine past water temperatures and acidity levels. What they consistently find is that recovery is a slow, non-linear process, full of false starts and setbacks. It is not a simple, upward trajectory, but a long, messy struggle for stability. This deep time perspective is invaluable because it provides the only long-term dataset we have on how life on Earth responds to extreme environmental change. It suggests that while the ocean's incredible resilience will eventually lead to a recovery of biodiversity from our current crisis, the reefs that return may be populated by entirely different casts of characters, functioning in ways we can only begin to imagine. This is not a reason for complacency, but for clarity. It underscores that our actions today are not just determining the fate of individual species, but are actively steering the course of millions of years of future evolution. We are not just causing a collapse, we are architects of a transformation, and the paleontological record is our most important guide to understanding what that new world might become. Beneath the jumbled skeletons of collapsed reefs, time has a way of entombing more than just biological remains. These underwater ruin fields have become the unlikely custodians of our own history, safeguarding a sunken archive of human ambition, tragedy, and daily life. When a ship founders on a hidden reef or a coastal settlement succumbs to rising seas, the event is a catastrophe in its own moment. But from an ecological perspective, it is simply the introduction of new, complex structure into the marine environment. Over decades and centuries, the relentless processes of the ocean take over. Coral larvae settle on the hard surface of a cannon. Sediment drifts to bury a ceramic pot. A metal hull slowly corrodes, leaching iron and other minerals into the water, subtly altering the local chemistry and creating a unique microhabitat for specialized bacteria and invertebrates. The result is a profound fusion of human artifact and natural world, where a sunken galleon is no longer just a wreck, it is a reef, an island of biodiversity built upon a cornerstone of history. This creates a remarkable cross-disciplinary timeline, a ledger where the pages are written in both coral growth rings and cultural artifacts. The Caribbean Sea, crisscrossed by centuries of maritime trade, is a prime example. The rubble fields surrounding these islands are littered with the remains of Spanish treasure galleons from the 16th and 17th centuries. When one of these wooden vessels sank, its decomposition released organic compounds and trapped minerals into the water. This sudden nutrient pulse would have initially created a dead zone, but as the wreck settled, it became a magnet for life. The iron fastenings and cannons provided a foundation for corals and sponges that prefer metallic substrates, while the shifting sands preserved smaller artifacts like coins, navigational instruments, and personal effects. The very presence of this new biological community, distinct from the surrounding natural reef, is a direct biological signature of a human historical event. By studying the species composition on and around a known wreck site, marine biologists can work with archaeologists to date the period of its sinking based on the age of the coral colonies that first colonized it, creating a beautiful feedback loop between ecology and history. The scale of this intertwining is even more starkly visible in the Pacific, where the violent history of the 20th century lies preserved on the seafloor. The lagoons of Micronesia, like Truk Lagoon, are the underwater graveyards of World War II. Here, the collapsed reefs form a somber backdrop for the shattered remains of Japanese warships, fighter aircraft, and tanks, all sent to the depths by American bombers. Over the ensuing 80 years, these machines of war have been utterly transformed. Their sharp, angular outlines have been softened by a lush, living coat of multicolored corals, sponges, and anemones. Schools of tropical fish now dart through the gaping holes torn by torpedoes, and octopuses make their dens in the dark confines of a fighter plane's cockpit. These sites have become world-renowned diving destinations, not just for their historical gravity, but for their astonishing biodiversity. They stand as powerful, ironic monuments. Instruments of death have been reclaimed by life, creating thriving artificial reefs that preserve the memory of the conflict while actively fostering ecological recovery in the surrounding damaged seascape. The collaboration between archaeologists and marine biologists at these sites is revealing secrets that neither field could uncover alone. They study how different materials degrade in the unique chemical soup of the ocean. The preservation of waterlogged wood, for instance, can tell us about the specific type of timber used in a ship's hull, pointing to trade routes and forestry practices of the era. The way leather from a sailor's boot decays can provide clues about the tannins used in its production, but perhaps most importantly, the layers of sediment that accumulate over these sites act as a climate archive. By coring into the seabed around a sunken settlement, scientists can analyze pollen grains and other microfossils trapped in the layers corresponding to the time of its submergence. This tells us what the local environment was like, what people were farming, how the coastline was changing, and provides tangible evidence for events like gradual sea level rise or a catastrophic tsunami that may have wiped the community off the map. These are stories of human adaptation and vulnerability written not in books but in mud and bone. Ultimately, these sites force us to confront a humbling and beautiful truth. Human history and natural history are not separate narratives. They are a single, intertwined story. A collapsed reef doesn't just bury the story of a changing climate and its effect on marine life. It can also entomb the story of a merchant vessel carrying goods between empires, a tragic naval battle, or a coastal community that lived in harmony with the sea until the sea finally claimed it back. Each layer of sediment, each artifact encrusted in coral, is a sentence in a much larger epic about our relationship with the planet. We are not just observers of these ecosystems, we are participants, and our past actions, from exploration to warfare to trade, have become physically embedded in the ecological fabric of the ocean floor. As we work to uncover these layers, we don't just gain a fuller picture of how oceans have shaped civilization through providing food, transportation, and inspiration. We also see, with startling clarity, how civilization has shaped the oceans in return, leaving behind a legacy that is both destructive and, in the most unexpected ways, creatively generative. The silent, crumbling landscapes of collapsed reefs have long guarded their secrets in the deep, but a new era of technological innovation is finally pulling back the curtain, allowing us to explore these hidden worlds without leaving a single fin print behind. Gone are the days when understanding these ecosystems required intrusive drilling or destructive sampling. Today, a suite of non-invasive tools is acting as our collective eyes and ears on the seafloor, transforming murky, complex rubble fields into detailed, digital landscapes ripe for discovery. At the forefront of this revolution are autonomous underwater vehicles, or UVS. These sophisticated robotic explorers are like underwater drones, programmed to glide silently through the water column for hours on end, capturing millions of high-resolution images and laser scans. They navigate the treacherous nooks and crannies of a collapsed reef with a precision impossible for human divers, stitching together thousands of individual photographs into sprawling, photorealistic three-dimensional maps. This allows scientists to virtually fly through a reef's architecture from the comfort of their lab, measuring the volume of rubble, counting individual coral colonies, and identifying microhabitats the size of a dinner plate that were once completely invisible to us. It is the difference between trying to understand a city from a single street corner and having a detailed, interactive satellite image of every building and alleyway. But seeing the structure is only half the story. To truly know who is living within that structure, science has turned to a tool that feels like something from a forensic crime drama: environmental DNA, or eDNA. Every organism, from the largest shark to the tiniest plankton, constantly sheds genetic material into its surroundings, tiny fragments of skin, scales, waste, and mucus. This creates a soupy, invisible cloud of biological information in the water. Researchers now simply collect a few liters of seawater from a collapsed reef and, back in the laboratory, use sophisticated genetic sequencing to read this molecular soup. They can screen the sample for the DNA signatures of thousands of species simultaneously, detecting the presence of elusive creatures without ever having to see, trap, or disturb them. This method is rewriting the book on what we thought we knew about these ecosystems. For instance, in the rubble fields of the Great Barrier Reef, eDNA analysis recently detected the genetic traces of several small, cryptic fish species that had not been physically sighted in those areas for over a decade and were presumed locally extinct. This was a stunning revelation, suggesting that tiny, resilient populations were holding on in the complex depths of the rubble, completely undetected by traditional survey methods. This technology doesn't just provide a snapshot, it allows for monitoring over time, revealing how the cast of characters changes with the seasons or after a major storm, providing a dynamic, living timeline of biodiversity in flux. The view from above is equally transformative. Satellite imagery and aerial drones provide the big picture, tracking changes in reef health across vast expanses of ocean over decades. Modern satellites equipped with hyperspectral sensors can detect subtle shifts in the color of the water, which correspond to changes in chlorophyll levels from algal blooms or the bleaching of corals below. This macro view allows scientists to identify early warning signals of stress long before a full-scale collapse becomes obvious from the water's surface. However, the sheer volume of data generated by satellites, UVS, and eDNA studies is so colossal that no human team could ever analyze it all. This is where the power of machine learning comes in. Researchers are training artificial intelligence algorithms to recognize patterns in this immense datasets. These AI systems can learn to identify specific coral species from a photograph, predict which areas of rubble are most likely to be recolonized based on past data, and even model future collapse scenarios under different climate conditions. They act as powerful digital assistants, sifting through centuries' worth of information in minutes to find the hidden connections and trends that would take a human lifetime to uncover. The true power of these technologies lies not in their individual capabilities, but in how they converge to form a complete picture. We can now use a satellite to identify a potentially stressed reef region, send an UV to map its physical structure in intricate detail, and then use eDNA to take a census of its inhabitants, all without causing any further harm to the fragile ecosystem. This integrated approach is fundamentally changing conservation. Instead of applying broad, blanket protections, managers can use these precise maps and species lists to pinpoint the exact areas that serve as vital life rafts for biodiversity, those resilient microhabitats and larval sources that have the highest chance of fueling a natural recovery. They can prioritize these hotspots for protection, ensuring that limited conservation resources are used with maximum effectiveness. We are no longer just guessing. We are making data-driven decisions based on a deep, multidimensional understanding of life and death in the ruins. This technological lens is revealing that the story of collapse is not one of simple emptiness, but of a subtle, tenacious, and incredibly complex struggle for survival, setting the stage to explore the remarkable partnerships that make this struggle possible. Amid the apparent chaos of a collapsed reef, a quieter, more cooperative drama unfolds, one built on ancient agreements and mutual benefit. It's a common misconception that such a place is solely defined by loss and competition. In reality, the breakdown of the old order creates a blank slate for new and often surprising partnerships to form. These symbiotic relationships are the hidden engines of the Rubble, the quiet collaborations that prevent total ecological bankruptcy and lay the groundwork for whatever comes next. They prove that even in ruin, community persists. Take, for instance, the humble yet industrious partnerships that form around the decaying coral itself. Certain species of shrimp and tiny crabs don't see a dead coral head as a tombstone. They see it as a furnished apartment and a full pantry. They will move into the abandoned pores and tunnels of the skeleton, gaining a safe haven from predators. In return, their constant activity, their feeding and waste production helps to physically break down the tough calcium carbonate structure. They are the ultimate recyclers, accelerating the process of turning a massive, solid block into a more manageable, loose rubble that will eventually become the foundation for new life. This isn't a one-sided takeover, it's a mutualism. The animal gets a home and a food source, while the ecosystem gets a crucial demolition crew, speeding up the timeline of nutrient cycling and sediment creation. On a much smaller, almost invisible scale, another critical collaboration is taking place. Algae and bacteria, often viewed as simple or even problematic organisms, become the unsung heroes of stabilization. They work together to form thin, slimy layers called biofilms across the surface of the rubble. This might not sound glamorous, but this living glue is absolutely vital. It acts like a net, binding the loose, shifting sediment particles together and preventing them from smothering any new life that tries to settle. Furthermore, this biofilm is a rich soup of nutrients. For the tiny, free-floating larvae of corals, sponges, and other invertebrates that are searching for a place to call home, this microbial mat is the first welcoming committee. It provides a nutritious meal, encouraging those larvae to settle down and metamorphose into their adult forms, effectively kickstarting the entire process of ecological succession. The smallest of life forms are therefore responsible for the biggest of tasks, preparing the foundation for the future. Perhaps one of the most charming and precise examples of this cooperation is the partnership between certain goby fish and blind shrimp. In the loose, sandy patches between rubble, the shrimp, which has terrible eyesight, acts as a tireless excavator, constantly digging and maintaining a burrow for them both to live in. The goby, which has excellent eyesight, stands guard at the entrance. The two maintain constant physical contact, with the shrimp often keeping one of its antennae touching the fish. At the slightest sign of danger, the goby will flick its tail, sending a vibrational signal to its partner, and both will dart back into the safety of their shared home. This is more than just a roommate's agreement. It's a perfectly evolved survival pact. The shrimp gets a security system, and the goby gets a professionally built shelter in an otherwise exposed and dangerous landscape. Their collaboration turns a vulnerable patch of sand into a fortified sanctuary. These intricate interactions are powerful evidence that ecological complexity isn't erased by collapse. it is simply rearranged into a new, often more desperate configuration. The old partnerships, like the one between coral and its photosynthetic algae, may be shattered, but the fundamental imperative to cooperate and form alliances remains a driving force of life. Scientists studying these processes have made a remarkable discovery. These pockets of symbiosis act as resilient nuclei. They create small oases of stability and nutrient cycling within the larger barren area. From these nuclei, recovery can slowly spread outward. A goby shrimp burrow, for example, might stabilize a small patch of sediment, allowing a few crucial blades of seagrass to take root. That seagrass patch then further stabilizes the area, attracting small herbivores, which in turn might attract larger predators. A single partnership can be the spark that ignites a chain reaction of recovery. This incredible adaptability forces us to expand our definition of a healthy ecosystem. It may not always be the vibrant, colorful coral city we imagine. Sometimes, health is the tenacious, cooperative struggle for survival in the ruins, the ability of life to forge new alliances in the face of adversity, and to find opportunity in disaster. This relentless drive to connect, cooperate, and endure is the most powerful argument for the ocean's resilience, setting the stage for the ultimate specialists, the creatures that don't just adapt to this new world, but have evolved to master it completely. Within the stark and seemingly desolate landscapes of collapsed reefs, a cast of highly specialized characters takes center stage, creatures for whom this rubble is not a graveyard but a kingdom. These are the ultimate specialists, organisms that have evolved over generations to exploit the unique opportunities presented by decay and destruction. Their very existence is a testament to life's relentless ingenuity, proving that even the most challenging environments can become home to those with the right adaptations. Consider the rubble-dwelling cardinalfish, a small, unassuming species that has turned the aftermath of collapse into a perfect nursery. Unlike other fish that might broadcast their eggs into the open water, this cardinalfish seeks out the empty shells of deceased mollusks or the tiny, protective cavities within the coral rubble. It carefully deposits its eggs inside these natural fortresses, guarding them fiercely from predators that would easily find them exposed on a healthy reef. This behavior is a direct and brilliant adaptation to a life spent amidst the ruins. Then there are the fireworms, whose name hints at their fiery sting. These bristled worms are the clean-up crew and occasional opportunists of the collapse zone. They thrive on a diet of decaying coral tissue and other organic detritus, their specialized mouthparts allowing them to scavenge efficiently from the skeletal remains. In a healthy reef, their numbers are kept in check by predators and competition. But in the open buffet of a recent collapse, their populations can explode, creating dense congregations that writhe across the rubble. They possess a remarkable tolerance for the low oxygen conditions that often develop where organic matter is decomposing, an adaptation that allows them to dominate this phase of the ecological timeline completely. These specialists are masters of disguise and survival. Many have evolved camouflage that makes them nearly indistinguishable from the speckled sand and broken coral fragments they inhabit. Others, like certain gobies and blennies, have developed the ability to withstand wide fluctuations in temperature and salinity, conditions that would quickly kill a more sensitive reef dweller. This suite of unique adaptations creates a fascinating ecological paradox. In the immediate aftermath of a collapse, while the overall biodiversity, the total number of different species, plummets, the sheer abundance of these few specialized creatures can skyrocket. A scientist surveying the area might initially record a low diversity score, but a count of individual organisms could tell a very different story, one of a boom in niche specialists. This presents a complex challenge for conservationists. How do we value an ecosystem that is less diverse but teeming with life that is incredibly rare and specialized elsewhere? The Philippine Islands offer a stunning example of this hidden value. Certain reefs that have collapsed due to a combination of dynamite fishing and typhoon damage are now recognized as global hotspots for endemic species, creatures found nowhere else on Earth. Researchers diving these rubble fields have discovered breathtakingly colorful sea slugs called nudibranchs, their intricate patterns evolving in isolation, and bizarre brittle stars with unique arm structures adapted for navigating the complex rubble matrix. These species did not simply move in. They are likely the product of evolutionary divergence, where populations became isolated in these unique habitats and gradually evolved into distinct species over time. The collapsed reef, therefore, acts as an evolutionary crucible, a pressure cooker that drives the creation of new life forms. This forces a profound shift in perspective. We can no longer view a collapsed reef solely through the lens of loss and tragedy. While the disappearance of a vibrant coral ecosystem is undeniably an ecological disaster, it is also, paradoxically, a catalyst for biological innovation and specialization. It is a stage for an entirely different kind of drama, one starring resilient survivors and strange new pioneers. Recognizing these adapted life forms is crucial for crafting effective conservation strategies. It means that these areas, often written off as lost causes, may hold critical conservation value as arks for rare and endemic species. Protecting them might not be about restoring them to a past glory, but about safeguarding the unique and novel ecosystem that has emerged from the rubble. This understanding reframes the entire narrative of collapse, revealing it as a dynamic and ongoing process of transformation, where the end of one world can mark the violent and creative beginning of another. The pace of change we are now witnessing is unlike anything in the historical record, compressing processes that once unfolded over millennia into the span of a single human lifetime. Sophisticated climate models paint a stark picture for the coming decades, projecting that without dramatic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, most tropical coral reefs will face annual severe bleaching events by the year 2050. This relentless frequency is the core of the crisis. A reef might survive a single bleaching event if given years to recover, but being hit again and again, year after year, is like forcing a patient to run a marathon without ever allowing them to catch their breath. The physiological stress becomes cumulative, eventually leading to systemic failure. This acceleration doesn't just nudge species toward the brink. It fundamentally alters the rules of survival, favoring only the hardiest, fastest-growing, or most adaptable organisms and pushing countless specialized creatures toward almost certain extinction. Yet, within this dire forecast, a fascinating and counterintuitive narrative of adaptation is already beginning to unfold. The immense selective pressure of these rapidly warming waters is acting as a forcible accelerator of evolution itself. In places like the mangrove lagoons of American Samoa and New Caledonia, scientists have discovered populations of so-called supercorals. These are not a new invention, but rather resilient varieties that have naturally thrived in hot, acidic, and low-oxygen waters conditions that would kill most of their relatives. These hardy survivors are now being studied and cultivated, as they may hold the genetic keys to resilience. Furthermore, the breakdown of old ecological boundaries is leading to unexpected hybridizations. As species distributions shift and previously isolated coral populations come into contact, they sometimes interbreed, potentially creating new hybrid offspring with a blend of traits from both parents. This is not a guaranteed salvation, but rather a chaotic, natural experiment playing out in real time, one that could give rise to novel ecosystems utterly unlike anything we have known before. The sedimentary archives we discussed earlier will become more crucial than ever, transforming from a record of past events into an essential baseline for measuring the unprecedented change of the 21st century. The layers of sand and silt being laid down right now in reef collapse zones are meticulously preserving a snapshot of this critical juncture. Future researchers will be able to analyze these cores to pinpoint the exact moment microplastics became a permanent part of the geological record, or to trace the genetic disappearance of sensitive species and the simultaneous rise of heat-tolerant ones. These deposits will serve as the ultimate calibration tool, allowing scientists to measure the velocity of ecological change with precision and to separate human-driven impacts from natural variability. They are the library where the story of our choices is being written in bone and mud. This compressed, accelerated timeline forces a profound and uncomfortable shift in how we define and value biodiversity. The classic measure, a simple count of the number of different species in an area, may become less relevant in a world where many of those species are vanishing. We may need to learn to appreciate and protect a different kind of richness, one based on resilience, functional roles, and genetic diversity within surviving species, rather than on a long list of names. The ecosystem of the future might have fewer players, but the ones that remain could be more generalized, tougher, and capable of forming entirely new ecological partnerships. This is not to diminish the tragedy of loss, but to recognize that conservation goals must be dynamic, evolving in tandem with the ecosystems they aim to protect. The challenge ahead is not merely to preserve a static image of the past, but to thoughtfully influence the trajectory of what comes next, guiding this forced transformation toward outcomes that maintain ecological function and beauty, even if they are unfamiliar. This leads us directly to the growing global movement of restoration and intervention, where science and stewardship meet to actively shape the future of our oceans. Faced with the accelerating pace of reef collapse, a global army of scientists, conservationists, and local communities is refusing to stand by as passive observers. Instead, they are rolling up their sleeves and stepping into the role of active gardeners of the sea, employing a fascinating toolkit of techniques designed to give nature a crucial helping hand. One of the most widespread and successful methods is coral gardening, a process that feels equal parts marine biology and delicate agriculture. It begins with researchers identifying supercorals, individual colonies that have miraculously survived a bleaching event in an otherwise devastated area. These resilient survivors are carefully collected, and small fragments no larger than a finger are taken back to underwater nurseries. These nurseries are extraordinary sights, vast networks of ropes, PVC trees, or metal frames suspended above the seafloor, where thousands of these coral fragments are attached and tended to. Here, in the ideal conditions of shallow, clear water, the fragments grow astonishingly fast, often up to 10 times their natural rate. After just 6 to 18 months, these once tiny fragments have grown into sturdy, dinner plate-sized colonies ready to be outplanted. Divers then carefully cement them onto the stable remnants of the collapsed reef, effectively reintroducing a population of heat-resistant corals that have a much higher chance of surviving future warming events. Beyond gardening individual corals, there are larger-scale engineering approaches aimed at rebuilding the very foundation of the reef ecosystem. In areas where the physical structure has been reduced to fields of unstable rubble, simply planting corals is not enough. They need a solid base to grow on. This is where artificial reef deployment comes in. These are not the discarded tires or concrete blocks of the past. Today's artificial reefs are sophisticated, scientifically designed structures, often made from pH-neutral materials that mimic the complex geometry of natural reefs. Some are 3D printed with intricate tunnels and overhangs, while others are modular units that can be stacked to create height and complexity. When placed on the seafloor, these structures do more than just provide a substrate for coral transplants. They immediately act as fish aggregating devices, offering shelter for juvenile fish and invertebrates. Their presence helps to stabilize the loose sediment, reducing the choking clouds of sand that can prevent coral larvae from settling. Over time, as these structures become encrusted with natural coralline algae, sponges, and transplanted corals, they begin to function almost identically to a natural reef, effectively jump-starting the entire ecological succession process that would otherwise take decades to begin on its own. Perhaps the most cutting-edge frontier in reef restoration is larval seeding, a technique that feels like something from a science fiction novel. Instead of physically moving adult corals, researchers focus on the microscopic beginnings of life. During the brief, magical nights of the annual coral spawn, when reefs release billions of pink gametes into the water in synchronized clouds, scientists are there with fine nets. They collect this genetic soup and rear the fertilized larvae in large floating enclosures out at sea. In these protected nurseries, the tiny coral larvae are provided with ideal conditions and even a specific soundtrack, the recorded sounds of a healthy reef, which has been shown to encourage them to settle. Once they have developed into settled polyps, they are delivered to the degraded site. This can be done in a truly futuristic way, by releasing them en masse from a boat, like sowing seeds across a field, or by using a biodegradable, gel-like substance that can carry and gently stick the larvae directly onto the rubble. This method has the incredible advantage of scale, potentially reseeding vast areas with millions of corals at once, and it maintains much higher levels of genetic diversity than transplanting fragments from just a few resilient parents. The true heartbeat of this global restoration movement, however, is found in the passionate involvement of local communities. In places like Bali, Indonesia, and the Florida Keys, restoration projects are deeply woven into the social and economic fabric. Village cooperatives are trained to build and maintain their own coral nurseries, turning conservation into a source of local pride and employment. These community stewards possess generations of intimate knowledge about their local waters, understanding seasonal currents, knowing which coral species traditionally grew where, and recognizing the subtle signs of change. By blending this traditional wisdom with modern scientific techniques, these community-led initiatives achieve a level of care and monitoring that would be impossible for outside scientists alone. This fusion of knowledge creates a powerful, sustainable model where the people who depend most on the reef for their food, culture, and protection from storms become its most dedicated and effective guardians. Their work is a profound reminder that saving these ecosystems is not just a technical challenge, but a human one, rooted in connection, responsibility, and hope for the future. This push to actively restore damaged reefs, however, forces us to confront a profound and deeply philosophical question. In our desire to heal, are we acting as wise stewards or as arrogant engineers, potentially disrupting natural processes we don't fully understand? The core of this ethical dilemma lies in a fundamental tension between two different visions of conservation. On one hand, there's the preservationist ideal, which seeks to restore ecosystems to a historical baseline, a pre-human state of pristine glory. This approach drives efforts to rebuild coral populations exactly as they were, reintroducing missing species and meticulously reconstructing the complex architecture of the past. The goal is to turn back the clock, to erase the damage and return to a known, functioning state. On the other hand, there's a more interventionist, forward-looking perspective. This view accepts that the planet is changing rapidly and irreversibly, and argues that we must actively guide ecosystems toward a new, functional state that can withstand future conditions, even if that future looks very different from the past. This might mean deliberately seeding reefs with genetically engineered supercorals, or accepting that the new ecosystem will be dominated by algae and sponges, and managing for that reality instead of fighting it. Each path carries its own set of risks and unintended consequences. Intensive restoration efforts like large-scale coral gardening and outplanting risk creating ecological dependencies. If we pour immense resources into cultivating and planting corals that are not truly self-sustaining, we may be creating a conservation zoo that requires perpetual human intervention to survive endless rounds of planting, weeding, and protecting. This raises the troubling possibility of conservation capture, where vast sums of money and scientific effort are funneled into maintaining artificial populations, diverting resources from protecting the last remaining wild, healthy, and self-sustaining reefs that should be our highest priority. Furthermore, a narrow focus on restoring the charismatic, familiar species, the colorful branching corals, and the iconic clownfish, can blind us to the intrinsic value of the novel ecosystems that have emerged from the collapse. In our zeal to bring back the past, we might inadvertently bulldoze the very resilient, rubble-dwelling specialists we just discovered, dismissing them as weeds or pests when they are, in fact, nature's ingenious answer to catastrophe. This brings us to the heart of the matter. How do we, as a society, define success? Is a project successful if it returns a reef to its 1950s species list? Or is it successful if it creates a stable, functional ecosystem that provides crucial services like coastal protection and fish habitat, even if that ecosystem is composed entirely of new species combinations? There is no easy scientific answer to this. It is a value judgment. It forces us to ask what we value most in nature: its historical authenticity, its functional utility, or its sheer wild, unpredictable capacity for change. These are not questions that scientists alone can answer. This is why the most critical step in any restoration project must be deep, meaningful engagement with the local and indigenous communities whose lives, cultures, and livelihoods are inextricably linked to these seascapes. Their historical knowledge, passed down through generations, can provide invaluable insights into how the ecosystem functioned in the past and how it has changed. More importantly, their values must guide the vision for the future. A community that relies on the reef for fishing may prioritize the return of certain fish species, while a community whose identity is tied to the coral itself may prioritize its visual restoration. Their inclusion moves the decision from a technical, top-down calculation to a collaborative, culturally grounded process. Ultimately, wrestling with these ethical complexities does not paralyze action, it enriches it. It ensures that our interventions are not just scientifically sound, but also philosophically considered and socially just. It reminds us that we are not separate from nature, but powerful participants within it, and that our choices, to intervene or to let be, to restore the past or to garden the future, carry immense weight. These choices will ripple out from the reef, affecting the entire marine food web that depends on it. Imagine a single thread pulled from a magnificent tapestry. At first, the damage seems localized, but soon the entire woven image begins to unravel in ways both predictable and astonishingly complex. This is the essence of a trophic cascade, a domino effect that races through an ecosystem when a key element is removed. In the context of a collapsed reef, the initial thread pulled is the physical structure itself. The intricate coral city provided not just housing, but the very stage upon which the drama of predation, grazing, and reproduction played out. Without this stage, the entire script is thrown into disarray, and the ripple effects travel up and down the food web, transforming the ecosystem from the bottom up. It often begins with the gardeners of the reef, the herbivorous fish. Parrotfish, surgeonfish, and rabbitfish are the relentless lawnmowers of the underwater world, their constant grazing keeping fast-growing algae in check and ensuring clean surfaces for young coral larvae to settle. When the reef collapses and these fish lose their shelter, they either perish or flee, abandoning their post. With the lawnmowers gone, the algae grows unchecked. What starts as a thin, fuzzy coat can quickly escalate into a thick, smothering blanket of seaweed. This algal carpet blocks the sunlight that any remaining corals need to sustain their symbiotic algae, effectively cutting off their energy supply. It also physically smothers newly settled coral polyps and other invertebrates, preventing the next generation from ever getting a foothold. The loss of a few grazer species doesn't just mean more algae. It means the complete shutdown of the reef's natural recovery mechanism, cementing the collapse into a long-term and potentially permanent state. The repercussions then echo upward to the apex predators. A healthy reef supports a pyramid of life, with small plankton-eating fish supporting larger mid-level predators like groupers and snappers, which in turn support the top predators like sharks and barracuda. When the base of this pyramid crumbles, the entire structure trembles. The loss of smaller prey fish due to a lack of habitat and food leaves the mid-level predators struggling. This scarcity then forces the apex predators to expend more energy searching for food, often leading them to abandon the area entirely in search of more productive hunting grounds. The disappearance of these top predators has its own secondary effects. Without sharks to control their populations, mid-level predators can sometimes explode in number, putting even more pressure on the few remaining smaller fish and creating a cascade that works its way back down the food web. The result is an ecosystem that is not just less diverse, but fundamentally unbalanced, swinging wildly between states of dominance and collapse. Yet, nature abhors a vacuum, and the silence left by the departure of one community is often filled by a different cast of characters. A collapsed reef, now a flattened plain of rubble and algae, can become an attractive foraging ground for large, migratory species that were once mere visitors. Loggerhead turtles may find the algal mats a plentiful food source, while manta rays and eagle rays might cruise the open sandy areas between rubble patches, using electroreception to hunt buried invertebrates. For a time, this can create a strange illusion of abundance, with large, charismatic animals making the site seem more active than ever. However, this newfound activity is often a sign of a degraded system. Furthermore, the concentration of these migratory animals in one area can disrupt their own natural migration patterns and put them at greater risk of local threats like ship strikes or entanglement in fishing gear. The ecosystem hasn't recovered. It has been replaced by a different and often less resilient set of interactions. The most immediate and tangible impact of these cascading changes is felt on the surface, in the lives of the coastal communities that have depended on these reefs for generations. A fisherman who once reliably caught a diverse mix of snapper, grouper, and parrotfish now finds his nets coming up empty or filled only with smaller, less valuable species. The collapse of the food web doesn't just mean fewer fish. It means a different composition of fish, one that may not align with local diets or market demands. This forces fishers to travel further, use more fuel, and often resort to less sustainable methods to make a catch, accelerating the cycle of decline. The loss is not merely economic, it is deeply cultural. Traditional knowledge passed down for centuries about where and when to fish for certain species becomes obsolete. Ceremonial feasts that relied on specific fish can no longer be held. The intimate connection between a community and the sea is fractured, replaced by uncertainty and a struggle for adaptation. This profound interconnectedness, from a single missing parrotfish to the livelihood of a family, demonstrates that a reef's collapse is never an isolated underwater event. It is a social and economic quake whose tremors are felt on distant shores, underscoring why understanding these delicate food webs is critical to protecting both our natural heritage and our human future. Long before sonar maps and scientific journals, the mysteries of collapsed reefs were captured in the stories told by the people who lived closest to them. Across the vast expanse of the Pacific, islanders spoke of great cities like Buratu or Hawaii that were swallowed by the sea in a single night of divine wrath, their coral towers and paved roads said to be still visible on calm, clear days to those blessed with second sight. In the Caribbean, generations of fishermen passed down warnings of the coral guardians, spirits or creatures that inhabited the reef ruins, punishing those who took too much or showed disrespect. These myths were not mere fantasy, they were the foundational science and risk management strategies of their time, born from keen observation and a deep, necessary connection to the ocean. A story about a vengeful spirit guarding a particular patch of reef was, in practical terms, a highly effective marine protected area, preventing overfishing and safeguarding a crucial source of food for the community. The tale of a sunken city often originated from the very real site of a collapsed underwater limestone structure whose geometric formations looked unnaturally like architecture to an observant diver. These narratives were a powerful way to encode critical information about the marine environment into a memorable, transgenerational format, ensuring that vital ecological knowledge survived even when written language did not. This traditional ecological knowledge, preserved in legend and taboo, often reveals a sophisticated understanding of marine dynamics that modern science is only now beginning to corroborate. For example, many Pacific Islander communities observed that after a major storm, certain species of fish would become unusually abundant around areas of reef damage. Their stories and subsequent fishing practices reflected this. They knew that the chaotic rubble fields created new hunting grounds for predators like groupers and snappers. This aligns perfectly with the scientific concept of a succession reset we discussed earlier, where the immediate aftermath of a collapse creates a boom for opportunistic species. Similarly, the timing of seasonal fishing bans in many indigenous cultures wasn't arbitrary. It was based on generations of observing coral spawning cycles, fish breeding seasons, and lunar cycles. A taboo on harvesting a particular shellfish during certain months was in effect a perfectly timed conservation law allowing populations to recover and reproduce, ensuring their long-term survival. This deep, place-based wisdom represents a parallel timeline of understanding, one that has tracked the rhythms of reef life for centuries. It demonstrates that the observation of collapse and regeneration is not new. What is new is our globalized awareness of its accelerating scale. The merging of these two timelines, the scientific and the cultural, is creating a far richer, more holistic understanding of reef history and human adaptation. Marine biologists working in places like Vanuatu or the Torres Strait are increasingly collaborating with indigenous elders, not just as subjects of study but as research partners. By listening to oral histories that describe how the coastline has changed over the last 100 years, scientists can ground truth in their models of sea level rise and erosion. An elder pointing to a specific, now submerged rock formation and recounting the story his grandfather told him about playing there as a boy provides a qualitative data point that is as valuable as a core sample. This collaboration is a two-way street. Scientists can offer tools like satellite imagery to help communities monitor their traditional waters for illegal fishing, while the community provides the deep contextual knowledge of why certain areas are more vulnerable or biologically significant. This fusion of high-tech data and ancient wisdom is proving to be one of the most powerful tools in the conservation toolkit, moving beyond a one-size-fits-all approach to create culturally resonant and scientifically robust protection strategies. Recognizing this cultural dimension fundamentally changes how we view biodiversity. It stops being just a count of species and becomes a tapestry woven with threads of identity, tradition, and spirituality. A particular reef isn't just important because it has a high density of staghorn coral. It's important because it is the site of a community's annual canoe blessing ceremony, or because it is believed to be the dwelling place of ancestral spirits. The loss of that reef to collapse is therefore not only an ecological tragedy but also a cultural one, an erosion of memory, identity, and heritage. This perspective forces a shift from a purely utilitarian view of nature, what can it provide for us, to a relational one. It underscores that our efforts to understand and protect these submerged worlds are about more than saving corals and fish. They are about honoring a deeply intertwined history of people and place, and preserving the stories that make us human. This holistic view transforms a collapsed reef from a mere graveyard of calcium carbonate into a living, layered archive, where every broken piece of coral holds not only a biological record, but also the echoes of human wonder, fear, and reverence. The power of art to shape our understanding of these underwater worlds is immense, transforming complex scientific data into something we can feel in our bones. Documentaries like the acclaimed Chasing Coral do more than just show us time-lapse footage of bleaching events. They frame the loss as a deeply emotional narrative, a silent funeral for a living city. The haunting score, the close-up shots of individual polyps struggling, and the palpable despair of the scientists involved, these elements craft a story of tragedy that a simple graph of rising sea temperatures could never fully convey. This emotional framing is a double-edged sword. While it can galvanize public attention and inspire a sense of urgency, it can also risk oversimplifying the science. A viewer might walk away with the powerful feeling that all coral reefs are doomed, missing the crucial nuances of resilience, adaptation, and the ongoing efforts of restoration we've explored. The artistic lens, in its quest for a compelling story, can sometimes flatten a complex timeline of collapse and potential rebirth into a single, heartbreaking snapshot of death. Yet, this creative interpretation is evolving beyond traditional film. A fascinating new frontier is the collaboration between artists and marine biologists to create deeply immersive experiences that bypass the screen entirely. Imagine strapping on a virtual reality headset and not just watching, but truly inhabiting a collapsed reef. You can turn your head to see a parrotfish nibbling at algae on a crumbling structure, reach out virtually to trace the intricate pattern of a boring sponge, and feel the eerie scale of the rubble field stretching into the blue gloom around you. These VR experiences, based on precise 3D maps created by autonomous underwater vehicles, are no longer science fiction. They are being used in museums and educational programs to foster a profound, embodied connection to these distant ecosystems. Similarly, innovative composers are using hydrophones to record the soundscapes of healthy and degraded reefs, the crackling of snapping shrimp, the grunts of fish, the relative silence of a bleached zone, and turning these recordings into symphonies that sonify the data of loss and recovery. This multi-sensory approach makes the abstract tangible, allowing someone sitting in a city far from the ocean to viscerally experience the stark difference between a thriving reef and a silent one. This artistic movement does more than just raise awareness. It actively reframes the narrative from one of pure hopelessness to one that acknowledges the profound cycle of life and death. Paintings and installations don't only depict the ghostly white skeletons of corals, they also showcase the vibrant, strange beauty of the shadow ecosystems that emerge, the brilliant colors of an opportunistic sponge colonizing a wreck, the delicate dance of a filter feeding crinoid on a barren rock. This artistic focus on the survivors and the new colonizers subtly introduces the concept of hope and transformation. It suggests that while the reef we knew may be gone, the story is not over. This shift is critical for motivating action. Data and statistics can inform us, but they often leave us feeling paralyzed by the scale of the problem. Art, however, can ignite empathy, evoke wonder, and inspire a protective instinct. It bridges the critical gap between knowing that a reef is in trouble and feeling a personal responsibility to help protect it, whether through supporting conservation charities, making sustainable consumer choices, or simply spreading the word. Ultimately, this creative exploration enriches our entire journey into these submerged mysteries. It reminds us that the value of a coral reef cannot be measured solely in species diversity or economic output. Its value is also found in its power to ignite the human imagination, to serve as a muse for creators, and to connect us to the awe-inspiring complexity of the natural world. The story of collapsed reefs is therefore a co-creation, a blend of biological processes and human interpretation, of empirical evidence and emotional response. This artistic lens ensures the conversation remains vibrant, accessible, and deeply human, as we now turn to examine the very concrete dollars and cents impact these ecological changes have on the global economy. The vibrant coral metropolis that once drew tourists from across the globe holds an immense tangible value, one that becomes starkly apparent only when it begins to vanish. The economic shockwaves from a reef's collapse travel swiftly from the ocean floor to the shore, directly striking the heart of coastal communities that have built their entire existence around these ecosystems. For a dive shop owner in the Caribbean or a family-run hotel in Southeast Asia, a bleaching event isn't an abstract ecological concept. It's a sudden, devastating evaporation of their livelihood. As the corals turn white and the colorful fish disappear, so do the tourists. Bookings are cancelled, boats remain docked, and the once bustling streets of a resort town can fall into a quiet despair. This isn't a minor dip in revenue. It's a full-scale economic emergency that can cripple local economies for years, forcing families to abandon generations-old businesses and seek work in already overcrowded cities. The loss is both immediate and brutally personal, yet in a fascinating and paradoxical twist, the very process of collapse can sometimes carve out unexpected, niche economic opportunities. As the living reef transitions into a crumbling ruin, a new type of tourism can emerge, so-called ruin diving or apocalypse tourism. These terms describe a growing interest among adventurous travelers to witness the dramatic, if somber, landscapes of ecological change. Sunken shipwrecks, long encrusted in coral, become even more historically poignant when set against a backdrop of recent collapse, their metallic skeletons now surrounded by the ghostly remains of a once thriving reef. Specialized tour operators now guide divers through these underwater graveyards, framing the experience as a powerful lesson in environmental awareness and a chance to see nature's resilience in the form of the new, adaptable species that move in. While this niche market can never replace the income from a healthy reef, it provides a crucial financial lifeline, allowing some dive operators to pivot and keep their businesses afloat, all while educating visitors about the urgent need for conservation. The economic stakes extend far beyond tourism and into the very security of coastal infrastructure. A healthy coral reef is not just a pretty landscape, it is a massive living seawall. Its complex, jagged structure acts as a natural buffer, absorbing up to 97% of a storm's wave energy before it ever reaches the shore. The value of this service is almost incalculable. By dissipating the destructive force of hurricanes and tsunamis, reefs prevent billions of dollars in property damage, save countless lives, and protect low-lying communities from devastating erosion and flooding. When a reef collapses and its structure is reduced to low-lying rubble, this vital protective barrier vanishes. The full force of the ocean then slams directly into the coastline, washing away beaches, undermining roads and foundations, and flooding homes and businesses. The cost of replacing this lost protection with artificial seawalls is astronomical, often running into tens of millions of dollars per mile, a financial burden that many small island nations and coastal towns simply cannot bear. This makes reef conservation not just an environmental strategy, but a profoundly cost-effective form of disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation. For the fishing industry, the collapse triggers a different kind of economic crisis, one that unfolds more slowly but just as surely. The initial indicator is often a shift in the catch. The prized high-value species like snapper and grouper that depend on the complex structure of a living reef for hunting and breeding are the first to vanish. They are replaced by smaller, less valuable generalist fish or invertebrates, forcing fishermen to work longer hours, travel further out to sea, and burn more fuel for a smaller and less profitable return. As the collapse progresses and the food web unravels, even these alternative catches can dwindle, leading to a total fishery collapse. This doesn't just impact the fishermen on their boats, it ripples through the entire supply chain, affecting fish markets, processors, distributors, and the restaurants and grocery stores that rely on a steady supply of fresh, local seafood. The loss of a reef fishery can erase a cornerstone of a community's food security and cultural identity, replacing a sustainable, generations-old practice with economic uncertainty and a reliance on imported goods. Confronted with these stark economic realities, policymakers and economists are now learning to speak the language of the reef. They are calculating the enormous monetary value of the ecosystem services that healthy reefs provide, from tourism revenue and fishery production to coastal protection and carbon sequestration. This isn't about putting a price tag on nature's intrinsic worth. It's a pragmatic tool for communication. It translates the abstract beauty of biodiversity into the concrete dialect of business and governance, making a compelling financial case for investment in conservation. The math is increasingly clear. Spending $1 million on a comprehensive reef restoration project, building nurseries, outplanting corals, and managing protected areas can yield a return of tens of millions of dollars in avoided disaster costs, sustained tourism income, and productive fisheries over the following decades. This long-term investment perspective reframes environmental protection from a charitable expense into a smart, forward-looking economic strategy essential for human well-being and resilience in a changing world. But perhaps the most profound transformation happens within the participants themselves. A recreational diver on vacation who uploads a photo of a rare nudibranch to a citizen science app begins to see the reef through a scientist's eyes. A coastal resident who regularly logs water temperature or turbidity starts to feel a sense of ownership and responsibility for the stretch of ocean outside their door. This process transforms passive observers into active stewards. They become local experts, armed with data and personal experience, and often evolve into the most passionate and effective advocates for conservation. They are the ones who can speak at town hall meetings, petition local businesses to reduce plastic use, or educate their neighbors about the importance of sustainable fishing practices. Their advocacy, grounded in first-hand observation, carries a weight and authenticity that abstract scientific reports often lack, creating a powerful grassroots force for change that can pressure policymakers and amplify the impact of formal research. This groundswell of collective effort has already yielded spectacular and invaluable discoveries. There are numerous documented instances where a keen-eyed citizen scientist has provided a critical piece of the puzzle. A tourist snapshot of a peculiar fish hiding in the rubble of a degraded reef in the Philippines led to the confirmed sighting of a species thought to have been locally extinct for decades. In Florida, volunteers conducting regular reef check surveys were the first to document the early, promising signs of coral recruitment on a patch of artificial reef structure, data that helped secure further funding for restoration projects in that area. These are not just isolated anecdotes, they are essential data points that fill in the gaps for professional researchers who cannot be everywhere at once. Each photo, each logged observation, each temperature reading is a pixel in a massive, ever-sharpening image of the ocean's health, helping to build a living timeline that is far more detailed and expansive than any single institution could ever create alone. Ultimately, this movement does more than just generate data. It fundamentally rewrites the story of scientific discovery. The narrative of submerged biodiversity is no longer the exclusive domain of academics publishing in specialized journals. It is becoming a collaborative, open-source story written by thousands of people from all walks of life: a teacher on spring break, a retired engineer, a student on a field trip. This democratization of science breaks down barriers, builds bridges between the public and the scientific community, and fosters a shared sense of purpose. It cultivates a deeper, more personal connection to the marine world, one that is based on participation rather than passive observation. This connection is the bedrock of long-term stewardship, inspiring a commitment to protection that is woven into the fabric of communities and passed down through generations, ensuring that the fate of our oceans remains a story that we all have a hand in writing. The vast, interconnected nature of our oceans means that no single nation can shoulder the burden of reef conservation alone. The challenges we've explored, from warming seas to the intricate timelines of collapse and renewal, are borderless, demanding a response that is equally global in scale. This is where international cooperation transforms from a lofty ideal into an absolute necessity, and where organizations like the International Coral Reef Initiative, or ICRI, step into a pivotal role. Think of ICRI not as a top-down governing body, but as a massive global round table. It brings together scientists, policymakers, and community leaders from over 40 countries, creating a shared space for dialogue and action. Their work is fundamentally about breaking down silos. A researcher in Australia can make a critical discovery about heat-resistant coral genes, and through ICRI's networks, that knowledge can be immediately shared with a conservation team in Belize, who can then adapt those findings to their local restoration projects. This constant, fluid exchange of information accelerates progress in a way that would be impossible if each country worked in isolation. This collaborative spirit manifests in incredibly practical ways. One of the most powerful tools is the development of shared, open-access databases. Imagine a single, globally accessible digital library where every water temperature reading, every coral health survey, and every species sighting from reefs around the world is stored. This isn't a futuristic concept, it's happening now. These vast datasets allow scientists to move beyond isolated case studies and identify large-scale patterns. They can pinpoint universal triggers for collapse, recognize early warning signs of bleaching events that span entire ocean basins, and most importantly, identify bright spots, those resilient reefs that are somehow beating the odds. These super reefs become living laboratories and natural arks, and international agreements can then prioritize their protection as global assets, crucial for receding and inspiring recovery elsewhere. Furthermore, this shared intelligence is vital for protecting migratory species. A green turtle hatched on the beaches of Costa Rica might spend its juvenile years foraging in the seagrass beds of Mexico before eventually taking up residence on a coral reef in the Bahamas. Its survival depends on the health of each of these geographically distinct ecosystems. International collaborations ensure that conservation policies are coordinated across these entire migratory routes, treating them as interconnected lifelines rather than separate national problems. Perhaps one of the most critical and often overlooked aspects of this global work is its focus on equity. The cruel irony of reef collapse is that the nations and communities who have contributed the least to global carbon emissions are often the ones facing the most immediate and devastating consequences. Small island developing states in the Pacific and Caribbean possess some of the world's most biodiverse reefs, which are central to their food security, tourism economies, and cultural identity. Yet, they frequently lack the multi-million-dollar research vessels, the advanced genetic labs, and the large budgets for restoration that wealthier nations can deploy. Global initiatives directly address this imbalance. Through partnerships facilitated by organizations like UNESCO World Heritage Center, funding, technology, and expert training are channeled to these frontline communities. A scientist from Fiji might spend a season working with researchers at a world-class institution, gaining skills in genetic analysis that they then bring back home to monitor their own reefs. This isn't about charity, it's about empowerment and justice. It ensures that the most vulnerable nations are not merely subjects of study, but are active, equipped leaders in the fight to save their own natural heritage. This collective endeavor is building something far greater than the sum of its parts, a truly accurate and holistic timeline of planetary change. When data from remote atolls in the Indian Ocean is combined with findings from the Caribbean Sea and the Coral Triangle, we can begin to separate local anomalies from global trends. We can see how a volcanic eruption in one hemisphere affects water chemistry in another, or how a change in Atlantic currents influences bleaching patterns on the other side of the world. This planetary perspective allows us to predict future hotspots of collapse and target our limited resources with surgical precision. It reveals both the universal vulnerabilities and the unique, localized solutions that work in specific cultural and environmental contexts. This cooperative model, for all its challenges and complexities, offers a powerful counter-narrative to the story of decline. It proves that our capacity for collaboration can be as profound as our capacity for destruction. It forges a shared responsibility for the ocean's future, creating a web of connection that links a fisherman in the Philippines to a policymaker in Norway, a student in California to a village elder in Madagascar, all united in the common cause of preserving the breathtaking biodiversity that lies beneath the waves. This vast, interconnected effort demonstrates that the story of our reefs is not yet written, and that its next chapters will be authored by a global community finally learning to speak with one voice. It's easy to feel like a single person's actions are just a drop in a vast ocean, but when it comes to the health of our reefs, every single drop truly matters. The collective power of individual choices creates a current of change that can directly alter the fate of these underwater worlds. turning the tide from passive observation into active stewardship. Think about the simple act of reducing plastic consumption. That disposable water bottle or shopping bag, if it escapes into the environment, has a high chance of eventually washing out to sea. There it can smother delicate coral polyps, be mistaken for food by marine animals, or slowly break down into microplastics that infiltrate the entire food web. By choosing a reusable bottle, refusing single-use plastics, and participating in local beach or river clean-ups, you are actively intercepting this waste stream at its source, preventing it from ever reaching the reef and adding to the burden of pollution. Another powerful lever each of us holds is at the grocery store and on the restaurant menu. The global demand for seafood is immense, and unsustainable fishing practices are a primary driver of reef collapse. When you choose to buy seafood, look for certifications from organizations like the Marine Stewardship Council, which indicate the fish was caught using methods that minimize bycatch and avoid harming the seafloor. Better yet, use handy consumer guides like the one provided by the Monterey Bay Aquarium's Seafood Watch program, which offers region-specific recommendations right on your phone. Opting for responsibly farmed shellfish like oysters or mussels can even be a net positive, as these filter feeders actually help clean the water. This isn't about giving up seafood. It's about making informed choices that tell the fishing industry we value healthy oceans and support those who work to protect them. For those who live near the coast or are planning a visit, your impact can be even more direct. If you're a diver or snorkeler, your behavior in the water is paramount. Maintaining proper buoyancy ensures your fins never kick and break centuries of coral growth. Resisting the urge to touch or stand on corals protects their delicate mucous membranes from damage and disease. And perhaps most importantly, carefully selecting your sunscreen is a simple act with profound consequences. Many common chemical sunscreens contain oxybenzone and octinoxate, which are proven to cause coral bleaching and disrupt coral reproduction. Switching to a mineral-based, reef-safe sunscreen that uses non-nano zinc oxide or titanium dioxide as the active ingredient creates a physical barrier that protects your skin without poisoning the water. When you book your next tropical vacation, seek out eco-conscious tour operators who limit group sizes, enforce strict codes of conduct, and often contribute a portion of their profits to local conservation efforts. Your tourism dollars become a vote for a business model that values preservation over exploitation. Yet, our influence extends far beyond our immediate consumption. One of the most powerful things any individual can do is to become an amplifier for the cause. Share what you've learned in this video with your friends and family. A casual conversation about the incredible story of reef collapse and regeneration can spark curiosity in others. Posting about a conservation organization you support on social media can introduce their work to a whole new audience. This act of education creates a ripple effect, expanding the circle of awareness and concern far beyond your own actions. Furthermore, consider lending your support, whether through a financial donation or volunteer time, to the NGOs and research institutions on the front lines. Groups like the Coral Restoration Foundation, the Ocean Foundation, and local marine societies are engaged in the hands-on work of growing corals, restoring habitats, and advocating for policy change. They rely on public support to continue their vital missions, and even a small, recurring donation can provide them with the stable funding they need to plan long-term. Ultimately, these individual actions are about embracing our role not as separate from nature, but as an integral part of it. Every sustainable choice, every informed conversation, and every advocacy effort is a stitch in the safety net we are collectively weaving for these ecosystems. They are a declaration that we refuse to be mere witnesses to a decline we saw coming. This empowerment is the most crucial takeaway. The timeline of submerged biodiversity is not a foretold prophecy. It is a story still being written, and each one of us holds the pen. By choosing to act, we inscribe our names not as the generation that watched the reefs vanish, but as the one that helped them endure, ensuring the next chapter is one of resilience and wonder. The layers of sediment and silent skeletons we have explored are far more than a record of endings. They are a living library of resilience, a testament to life's stubborn refusal to surrender. This journey through the enigmatic timelines of collapsed reefs has revealed a story that is both humbling and inspiring. We have witnessed the devastating power of a warming ocean and the crushing weight of human impact, forces that can dismantle a vibrant underwater city in a geological instant. Yet, in the very same rubble, we have also discovered nature's astonishing capacity for reinvention. The cryptic partnerships, the specialist species, and the quiet, persistent processes of succession that begin the long work of rebuilding almost before the dust has settled. This is not a simple tale of doom or a naive promise of salvation. It is a complex, layered narrative that challenges us to expand our very definition of life and value. The shadow ecosystems teeming with bizarre and beautiful creatures, the paleontological lessons etched in stone, and the ethical questions that arise from our own power to intervene, all of these threads weave together a richer, more nuanced understanding of our planet. They show us that biodiversity is not a static museum exhibit to be preserved under glass, but a dynamic, ever-flowing river of change, adaptation, and unexpected renewal. The collapse of a reef is a profound loss, but it is also, paradoxically, a beginning, a violent and creative reset that has shaped the oceans for 500 million years. The most crucial lesson from these submerged archives is that we are now the authors of the next chapter. The choices we make today, the plastics we refuse, the sustainable seafood we select, the policies we advocate for, and the carbon emissions we strive to cut, will all be recorded in the layers of sediment that accumulate tomorrow. Future scientists, whether they are paleontologists or marine biologists, will be able to read our legacy in the chemistry of the water and the composition of the fossils. Will they see a sharp, definitive line marking a period of great negligence, or will they detect the gradual return of stability, a signature of a global community that chose to change its course? This responsibility is not a burden to carry alone, but a privilege to share. I am deeply curious to hear which part of this deep dive resonated most with you. Was it the discovery of ghostly cities preserved in the seabed, the surprising partnerships in the ruins, or the powerful role of technology in uncovering these secrets? Share your thoughts and your own questions in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation as a community of curious minds. And if you want to join me as we unravel other great historical enigmas, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next adventure into the past. Together, through informed action and shared wonder, we can ensure that the story of our oceans, for all its challenges, remains one of awe-inspiring beauty and relentless, hopeful life. The next layer is